Hi, Sean McCracken, news editor for Hotel News Now, here with Jesper Palmqvist, STR's main guy in Asia Pacific. And Jesper, what's going on in Asia this month?
What's going on in Asia? Well, good to see you, Sean. Thanks so much for having me again. Yeah, it's been an interesting month when we come out of the first quarter, and I suppose so the first month of the fiscal year for some of the countries. And I think it's always tricky to talk about sentiments and non-empirical data, but I have been traveling around a bit in the last 6 weeks in Australia and a bit in China and throughout Southeast Asia. And I feel like I'm hearing a little bit more pessimism. And then I obviously try to match that up with the performance. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about that because there seems to be some pessimism, which is interesting because second quarter is usually not the strongest quarter in general. Yeah. And we know that can mean volatility when we're still working on it. So I think that is one thing. And I also think that it's an interesting time geopolitically in the region overall, for sure. A lot of things happening there. And also economically and financially, everyone's concerns both about interest rates and what's happening in the other asset classes too, actually. So I think those are three headliners for that today.
So what's the usual lag time between sentiment dip and actual performance dip, or is there one?
That's a good question. I think it used to be, it's kind of like booking window. I think it used to be a bit longer, but now it's shorter. It has a faster impact overall, and people. And I mean, listen, for a company like ours, is it great that people spend more time looking at the data? For sure. Our data and other people's data, that's great. I think that's one thing with the crisis, right? People look more at it. Can you have too much data? No, you just gotta pick what is necessary for you. So I think it's been a short turnaround for people when they realize that the booking windows are shorter and length of stay is usually a bit longer overall at a high level in the region here as well. So they look at that and go, hang on, my next few weeks are not looking the way they should. So they're not looking second half of the year. And I felt like last year and the year before that, people would look more, what does the end of the year look like? Right, generally. So it's just more closer to it.
So let's dial in just a little bit more, because obviously asking what's happening across the region is a big question that's almost impossible to answer. Yeah. What's going on in China? Obviously, we've talked every single episode about China and maybe the difference in perception here in the West versus closer to home there. So what's the latest there?
Yeah, in one way it's kind of more of the same, but what stands out now is that since the last time we spoke, we had a big holiday. And the three big holidays are very important to track, right? The Lunar New Year, and there's Labor Day, so the May Day, Golden Week, and then the National Day in Q3. So with this one, there was a lot of expectations, but also a lot of fear that, and it's kind of two layers. One is, of course, the domestic travel and how that impacts on the leisure markets around the country, but also the greater China markets of Hong Kong and Macau. And then, of course, the outbound, right? A lot of countries were hoping, are they now ready to come in larger groups? So we've definitely seen what happened there. And it wasn't necessarily it depends on how you look, obviously. What's your benchmark? Outbound, not amazing, right? It didn't have a huge impact. There are a few markets that got more. Phuket in Thailand, they got more for sure. And we could see, we check every day as that travel come out. It's also a little bit with the flights that don't go everywhere. But Phuket gained some, and Japan did gain some because of exchange rates and everything. But the numbers there aren't extraordinary. So they get some, but not all. And then domestically, it was a disappointment because when you compare it to the last year, and you got to remember last year in China was the first big holiday after they opened up.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that long ago. We still keep remembering it was Q1 last year when they really truly opened up. So this is the first holiday which pushed everything from that whole revenge concept. So we saw rates in mainland China between 10 and 20% lower this year during the holiday dates. And that's an insane thing for me to say. Which market has lower rates than last year? Like, you don't know many, right? So that was the main thing that we wanted to call out this week. Now, were those rates higher than 2019 and 18? Yeah, but not by a crazy amount. So clearly there is something there. And that speaks to what we talked about last month and the consumer spend concerns, just the ceiling around that and how discretionary income is being spent across retail and everything. And if you look at what the Chinese government are trying to help out as well, you remember the residential challenges in terms of loans and defaults there. The most recent there is talk of mainland companies buying up those unfinished units and in limbo, and there's a lot of those in order to redistribute, which you talk about. State-owned enterprises can move money around a little way within the system in order for that delivery to happen. So clearly there are large macroeconomic methods underway to make sure that Chinese continue spend, so we don't see an economic effects. So yeah, the big story there is really that rate drops from last year on the holiday, and compared to April this month versus April last year, it was 7% down overall. So it's not just the May Day holiday. So overall, that's a pretty strong signal, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like the oversimplified Western view of it is everybody assumes that, I mean, the American traveler, the Western traveler has had a specific recovery path post-pandemic, right? So the simplified thinking here
for sure
is that, China is a couple of years behind us because of the extended lockdowns there, but they're going to have the same exact trajectory as us. It seems like maybe the reality is a little more complicated than that.
It's such a good point, because we got used to those narratives that we spoke of as well, because they were true most places, but not apart from China, right? How they opened earlier and everything. So what we had, and it's interesting because when I was up in Macau last week, and when we talk about tourism, so the projection this year is that you'll have 6 billion trips, right? So 6 billion trips domestically, and forecast to be somewhere around 270, 260 million combined inbound and outbound. So obviously dwarfed by that. And it's the balance of the inbound and outbound from Greater China that'll be interesting to track. The first quarter had 13 million inbound travelers. And that's kind of a celebration in a way. That's a good number, but that's 13 million, right? So, but as you notice, why is this happening? Why is it growing? Well, China has made itself open, right? In so many ways. Everyone can read about the visa-free country. 50, I think I'm right in saying, is it 49 or 59 or 58 countries that are now visa-free for 15 days, and their cruise ships. China's doing all of this now. And we haven't seen that before, right? That is, we always had the 48 or the 144 hour. I'm not sure what we counting hours. It's kind of like saying like a baby is 360 months old. So I'm not sure why they do it 144 hours. But so there is something there. They clearly understand the game. Tourism is good. Let's bring inbound tourism in, and that could help those rates that we talk about, right? You get foreign customers, dollarized or whatnot, and help out. So there's some there. It depends on where they're going, right? You have a golden triangle, if you will, Xi'an, Beijing, Shanghai, and maybe Guilin. Those markets are the ones that take most of the tourism. But someone like Sanya, that's where the biggest drop is. That's a huge drop. The Hainan, the Hawaii of China, right? So yeah, totally different dynamic from many other countries, and it's fascinating. And if anyone still hasn't been to China, now that you have a strong dollar, I'd recommend it. It's a beautiful country to visit.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I will say, I mean, I just had an international travel conversation with Emmy Heiss, also from CoStar, and Daryl Krong from Tourism Economics, and they brought up that idea of like, hey, it's a great time to go to Japan because of the currency exchange. It's still not cheap, like for the average person. Like getting there is still pretty expensive.
Yeah, so you're on the other side of the planet. So I get that. Now, now what you could do, now if you're traveling on a budget, you could I'm sure you can find a reasonably priced flight over to Japan. And remember, we have some new budget airlines working out of Japan, like the Zip Air and the Air Japan. So both budget airlines of JAL and Nippon. They do like $200-300 from Japan to Singapore and stuff like that now. So right now, I would counter that and say yes, but once and it's obviously true. Japan has, certain things when you're there you can spend. If you go to Tokyo and you want to stay in a high-end luxury property, it is a lot cheaper, but it's still high rates for sure. Remember, the rates have gone up 30-40%. So but if you go, and this is what the Japanese tourism board will say, you should go outside. If you go to Japan, you don't just go to Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka, you will pay. But if you go outside, there's discounts there. In China, it's the same, right?
Yeah. I think the idea there is, though, if you are committed, if you are interested in going to Japan or going to China, right now is a great time to do it.
That is absolutely right. Now is a good time to do it.
Otherwise, I don't think that the cost benefit is going to drive people who are otherwise disinterested.
Probably not. Probably not.
So you mentioned right before we were recording that in your home of Singapore that you guys just had a big tourism event. So how has that impacted things?
Yeah, so every year the Singapore Tourism Board, the STB, they have their tourism industry council where they give an updated view on the vision. You have to remember that Singapore is a country that plans extraordinarily well. Right, It has both from infrastructure and everything economically.
It's a very type A country. Yes,
that is a very good way of putting it. So, and in that event, I suppose after 12 to 18 months of strong delivery by Singapore Inc., if you will, and STB, everyone, I suppose, was a little bit curious what's next, because there's always an expectation, because it's not just about what happens in the next couple of years. STB lays out the 2040 plan. So that's in 15 years' time. So there's a long-term vision. Terminal 5 coming in 2035 right now planned, a new terminal at the great airport here. And also that Marina Bay Sands. So the Sands property, MBS, is going to add their 4th tower, which is delayed to open by 2029. So another 1,000 keys next to the 3 already there in that signature landmark property that everyone can see in the pictures of Singapore during the Formula One, and new attractions like a Porsche racetrack and things like that. So they lay out that vision, and that's all good. But I suppose that also goes to that comment around a little bit of pessimism. Even though all the new hotels in Singapore that was supposed to come, most of them have opened. We have a Standard opening soon and a couple of others, but most of it's open by now. It's a delicate balance, and I get that, because staff, like finding staff and obtaining it here during in a city state where we rely on migrant workers is not easy. And you have that combined with such a tight balance of the cost control and your profit margins right now. I get that it's because it's easy to get spoiled. Taylor Swift is not going to come every weekend, right? Or every week, that is, because it was 6 nights, right? So, good luck with the comps next year.
Only Kansas City gets that treatment.
So I think Singapore is excited, but also a little bit like, actually the next year's version of this event is more interesting, because the authority that hands out and works which land parcels should be redeveloped and sites, they have the big reshuffle on that and update next year. So I think next year will be even more interesting.
All right. So we've talked a lot through the course of doing this podcast about, maybe not the specific episode, but in general about the importance of airlift. And you made some interesting comments just before I was recording about maybe it being a little more complicated than people might think it is. So what's the latest on airlift to Asia Pacific?
Yeah, it's interesting. We used to be able to say that in a sentence, like, "Hey, we're missing airlift," and then it was simple. And then what happened was we got the short haul, so the narrow body aircrafts into play. And he brought the prices down within Southeast Asia, always and domestic for India and China and the markets that rely heavily on more domestic. So we got to that point. We still miss on a number of routes some of the large aircraft that is needed to bring people to certain destinations, without a doubt. And that could be particularly from, say, 3-4 tier cities or European cities or something. So we're missing some of that. But I think the perspective and the lens is important also, that it's different. And I think that's also part of the fear, maybe, in that I perceive as pessimism, because if you're not having the 5-6 source markets that you're used to as an island or a destination, and the tourism authorities doing everything they can, and the governments, then you're sitting there going, oh, what do they? How do I capture those guests? Because, like, for instance, everyone's talking about Australia and China, right? So they've obviously politically hasn't been maybe the best in the last couple of years, but at least the Chinese can now buy Australian wine again as of a few months, right? So that's open. But we say airlift was missing, but then Qantas opened the Shanghai-Sydney pipe about 9 months ago, and they just declared end of last week that they're going to call it off and not do it after 9 months. Not enough people traveling on it. So then... Right, and they're also limiting the amount of the investment visas and things. So there's, even if it's their politics in there, that's not tourism in that sense. So every route is a little bit different. Everyone's still relying and waiting on the India, but India did so much great work in picking up some of that slack on being an international hub. So that's gone obviously well, and with Dubai's last month there with the floodings and stuff. It's a quick game to step into. I think we're still going to be interesting to see the rest of the year what the flight schedules show when they schedule that. But it is definitely, to your point, it's more complicated, which makes it harder. So I think that's part of that kind of fear for markets.
And I imagine the geopolitical outlook in general is getting a little more maybe murky.
It is, yeah. You know what? It feels a bit peak right now. And we keep saying, like, does geopolitics impact tourism and travel, and how a hotel performs? Like, it usually doesn't. I stand by that. But if it impacts, it really does. But right now, there's enough news that could start impacting, right? So it's not just elections everywhere, but the tensions. We have a new leader in Taiwan, right, that quickly went out and said that China should relax a bit, kind of, and that's, might have effects. And then you have polarizations that continue. Putin obviously went to Beijing and firmed up his relationship with the Chinese leadership. Saudi leadership is in Japan. The U.S. has been in Philippines is this week so. And then even the uprising in New Caledonia, horrible stuff happening down there in smaller markets. So, yeah, I'd say there's enough news on headline news in geopolitics right now. So I think people pay more attention to it than they would in a normal quarter. So that's also something to kind of have an outlook for and a view on during this quarter for sure.
Yeah. So earlier, or just a little bit ago, you mentioned Australia, which is a country that I feel like we haven't talked much about in this podcast, but you had just gone down there. What do you feel like is the general sense down there, and how are things kind of trending in Australia?
Well, the most important thing is the mighty Sydney Swans are doing really well, Sean.
Well, we've talked off air about how this is going to transition to being a footy podcast sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so the Swannies are really picking up. So, and if you're from Victoria or listening and you have another affiliate, then I do apologize, but they're having a cracker season. They're at the top of the ladder. But it's a great footy season for sure. And now that we have American interest in it, God knows what will happen. But at some
point, Jesper, during this podcast, I will unpack all of our exceeding interest in Cleveland, but maybe not today. I have declared, I've planted my flag with the Sydney Swans, though. So if anybody's listening, it's 2 homers on the call right now. So that's all you're gonna get.
Very good. Very good. I like it. And as a Colorado Rockies fan, I would say after winning 7 straight, after being the worst team in baseball, it's been, and then going to San Francisco and getting wiped out. Was an interesting weekend.
Oh my God. So I never heard. All right, we'll go ahead and decide. We'll talk about Australia. Let's take a minute to unpack. You're a Rockies fan, which I can empathize with this season because I am ostensibly a Chicago White Sox fan, the other worst team in baseball.
Yeah, you and me and the Marlins, eh? Yep, there we go.
So
yeah, I inaugural season '93. I saw about 50 games that season. So
I will say all the more reason for us to enjoy the Swans this year.
There you go. Exactly. Got to pick a team that works. But Australia as a hotel market and tourism market, obviously what's missing, if you start on that side, is, the international, like we just talked about the flights. It's missing some of the international and some of the weekday. But the capitals came back and joined, and the regional markets doing okay. But the biggest thing that we were waiting for, which has happened now, is that the two main engines of Melbourne and Sydney have tracked back. They're back in like the demand and occupancy compared to the other capitals of the states and territories. So that's always an important signal. Then the business travel. So it's this broad recovery. It's kind of like with India having a super broad recovery on leisure, tourism, and corporate and regional markets everywhere. Australia seeing similar, but not as much on steroids as maybe India, and started earlier. So Australia's broad recovery where market as expected and called out earlier, Melbourne will be a little bit slower because of the mass loads of supply, new supply hitting, great new hotels and brands. It'll just take a bit longer, but not with real concern. Anyone investing and owning properties in these markets is still excited about the outlook. It's, safe bets and good. So Australia's coming back, and I mean, and one nuance maybe that is a little bit different because sometimes Australia behaves as a Western market. Right. And but one thing that we haven't really seen is that as people have returned to office, the work flexibility and work from home, even if that happens, and having been down there as well in both Sydney and Adelaide recently, I remember when at least in London, Thursday is the new Friday, right? In terms of bars, which means lunch restaurants on Friday suffer, but the bars on Thursday are in good shape. Not seeing the same, at least what I've seen and heard and read about for Australia. So it's not shifting societal behavior in that sense, and definitely not across Asia. Even if we have work from home schedules and work flexibility, we're not seeing the same. And that's another difference between, I suppose, the West and Asia Pacific as a whole and how that shifts.
That's interesting. I mean, the contrast too between India and Australia is interesting too, because it seems like, I mean, India is such a unique circumstance, and like you described it, it's on steroids. It feels like Australia might be more natural gains, more just more normal, right? It feels like a more normal recovery path.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the sober view on that, what's normal is that, I have to remember, before all this, Australia had what we, I suppose, call a mature hospitality and travel market.
Yes.
Right. And yes, even if Melbourne and Sydney were the bigger ones, but Gold Coast and other markets, and they have big events, Olympics are coming and all that. So it was a market that behaved in patterns and cycles that we can easily identify with. And that helps. Whereas India is a young tourism market, with hotel market that is only arguably 20 years old, like China in that sense, in terms of brands. But as was reported, and Sébastien Bazin was saying as well, the opportunities there so much for India to develop, but we're not seeing any big numbers yet. What's taking it so long? And I think next time we talk, we should probably talk a little bit more about India again and how that's facing up in that particular recovery.
Lots to unpack with India for sure.
Yeah,
also, but I do look forward to probably over the next calendar year hearing every American business person who has been stumping for full return to office to say, well, look at Australia. It's great in Australia. So that's what I fully anticipate after this conversation.
Well, it's a good place. We come into the softer winter, as you know. It's winter time coming up.
Yep. Any final takes today, Jesper? Either footy related or otherwise?
Well, I'm sad on the sports theme that Lando didn't take the Formula One race yesterday. And obviously, as expected, Man City won the Premier League. But I think what matters in our industry, I think if people are following things and looking, the numbers to look for now is really in if the sentiment is, we're hearing a little bit more pessimism and fear around it, it's important to track in the next few weeks if performance doesn't really replicate that. And I think it's just choosing your right benchmark there, because if you do it by 2019, that's another thing we talk about a lot these days. People ask, why 2019? There's a couple of markets where 18 and 19 is relevant, but it's of course 5 years ago. So much will have changed, but in a couple of places it's fine to do it. But otherwise it's 23 to compare with, or just a blank slate. So benchmarking it's a little bit more interesting now when you have more benchmarks than just traditionally year over year. Does that make sense?
It is crazy that 2019 was 5 years ago. All sense of time has gone out the window.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because when I get it, if I'm comparing something on China 5 years ago, that I can do that, but what's the point of comparing Sydney 5 years ago to now?
Yeah.
You struggle with that a little bit. So you got to look more on last year and what's happening right now in the market and your profitability, right? So, yeah.
Well,
awesome.
Thanks again, Jesper. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Sean. Have a good day.
Hi, I'm Davon Reed.
I'm Omari Head.
And I'm Chris Henry.
We're the hosts of the Next Gen and Lodging podcast on the Hotel News Now podcast network. It's a monthly show in which we interview a new generation of hoteliers to get their insights into a variety of disciplines and topics, from finance to food and beverage and hotel operations. Listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening to the Hotel News Now podcast. This episode was recorded on May 20th, 2024, and edited by Sean McCracken. Go to hotelnewsnow.com for the latest news every day.